Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit today about internal family systems, which people sometimes just call IFS. And I think it's a really important theory that's going around. Creator is Richard Schwartz, Dick Schwartz. Um, and it's going around therapy, the therapy community, but also outside of that too. A lot of leaders are, studying and working, and people are using this modality for their own healing, right? So maybe we can just start off by talking a little bit about the idea, first of all, that in terms of IFS, we're not just one single person, right?
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, we have this usually have this assumption that we just have one personality. Like I am me, I am Nick. But IFS really makes the argument that all of us have multiple personalities, um, and not in a pathologizing way, but we have different parts of us that have kind of split off at certain times and are playing different roles for us in our life. And so, at any given moment, any given therapy session, any given like relationship, a different part of us might be emerging. That being said, he also makes the point that there is kind of like a larger greater self, right? Capital S self, that is actually like greater than our parts, right? Can you talk about that, Megan?
Yeah. I mean, I think uh Dick really thinks of it. I think it's become a very spiritual practice for him, although you don't have to be spiritual to practice this. But I also think of the self is it's sort of like the higher self.
Mhm.
So it is the self that is acting from love, compassion, connection. Because oftentimes when we're acting out of fear, mostly fear, right, which can be anger, it can be all kinds of things, that those are actually fearful parts, but that I think there's a belief that at all times we are fully whole and perfect human beings, right? So the
Right.
the process is this accessing the self. Once you get to know the different parts,
Right.
who's knowing the parts? It's that higher self, right? So that's the main part of the work.
Right. Right. I was just yesterday read this Pima children quote that said, "We are the sky, and everything else is just weather."
Yeah.
I think that's what IFS is getting at too. Like you do have a greater self. It's not necessarily the self that you're in this moment, but you have access to a part of you that feels like even bigger than yourself, right? And IFS tries to get us into that space of greater self so that then we can really be with our smaller parts in a compassionate way.
Totally, totally. Yeah, I feel that I mean, my own feeling is that that higher self is really greater consciousness. It's
Mhm.
loving awareness itself, right? Which I
Mhm.
think is the one consistent thing. Uh, anyway, let's talk a little bit about, so the parts, these parts, or kind of like inner children or inner personalities, there's sort of three categories. But let's talk about the exile first, because the exile is kind of the one that the other two are trying to keep in the basement, right?
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Exiles, we all have them. It's those sort of more childlike parts of us that are holding major trauma, major hurt, major pain of some kind, and we're just trying, well, the other parts are trying to kind of like keep them out of consciousness.
Yeah.
Um, so what else would you add about the exile, Megan?
Yeah, I mean, I think the exile, I mean, I think oftentimes it's early wounding, right? So it's carrying that shame. I think it's carrying terror. I will say that I'm doing IFS work with my own therapist. Yes, therapists do therapy. Um, and that it's really hard to work with the exile because it's used to being hidden away. And if the other parts are very good at sort of controlling life, it keeps that, they're trying to keep the pain out of our existence. They're all the parts are trying to help us get along. The problem, though, is that if the exile is always pushed down in the basement, it's kind of seeping energy from our system. We're not able to have like a fully alive,
Mhm.
free creative life, right? Because we have this real painful thing. And oftentimes it's a belief that is no longer happening, but that part is very wary of the world, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Easily.
And that part, yeah, and that part, and we see this a lot with clients. That part actually feels like it is still that age, like it might still feel like it's 6 years old and it just was abandoned by its parents, right? So you're really dealing with a part that it's not fully in the present and it's needing to be kind of parented at the age that it's at, right?
That's right. That's right. And then, so the other two categories are really, they're trying to help keep that exile in the basement. So another category is managers. And
Right.
the manager parts are trying to just kind of control things so that we don't feel those feelings. We're trying to control our outside existence so like perfectionism is one of them, and I can really relate to that as a performer. And I'm a recovering people pleaser. This is a manager part of me because that part of me feels like if if I can take care of you and you're happy, then I'm going to be safe. So
Yeah.
it's all about safety.
Right.
But what happens is that over time, like, people pleasing isn't always going to be appropriate in my adult life,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, and so if my higher self can understand and connect with this part, then I can start to relieve it of its duties,
Mhm.
and then the part doesn't poof go away, but the part is kind of freed to be maybe more creative or just friendly with people without having to people please, right?
Right. Right. Um, I don't think I could explain it any better. I think that this is the manager part. I think we all know it in ourselves,
Yeah.
the like overly controlling. I was just using an example, an image this morning in our group supervision space of scaffolding. Like it's trying to just keep everything, keep everything together, both internally and externally, in order to avoid from this chaos of these like younger exile parts who are feeling these big, messy emotions. It's like, no, we can just keep everything controlled and everything's going to be okay. And we
Yes.
definitely have all that. We have that very strongly. And I think the queer community in particular, we've been through so much in our younger lives, so much that we had to just mostly compartmentalize, and just focus on survival, right? Like we just had to focus on getting through and surviving. And so that manager part for the queer community can be really strong.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And then lastly, let's talk about what the firefighters are. So the firefighter parts, if something, I think most people are familiar with the term triggered, like when we get triggered,
Mhm.
something happens or somebody says something and we're triggered. And what that means is like the basement door is open and that little exile is going to come out, right? There's all of a sudden a lot of fear. The firefighter comes in and does big things to try to just cover up the situation and kind of protect the exile. So one thing I do remember, this is many years ago, but I actually found myself, I was triggered, but didn't really know it. And this is actually before I really knew what that meant. And I found myself sitting on the edge of a hotel bed and eating this candy. And I was aware that I was eating a lot of candy, but I didn't really know why. And so that was a firefighter in action, that I was triggered and my firefighter is trying to numb out with like
Yeah.
sugar So numbing out is a really, or dissociating is a sort of a firefighter tactic. Um,
Mhm. Mhm.
what
Yeah.
else? What else might we
Well,
think of?
it's just all about like finding temporary relief. So like substances too.
Yeah,
Eating is sort of a substance in itself, but
yeah,
also drugs, alcohol are a way to just they're like they're coming in and they're saying, how can I just make it feel better or make it feel less bad,
yeah.
and that's a really there is like they're trying really hard, like they're trying to help. It might be sort of in like the wrong way ultimately, but like their intention is to like help us to not feel so much pain, right?
Yeah, it's exactly like, the sort of the common idea, like, your partner breaks up with you and you just want to go out and get so drunk, right? You're
Mhm.
just trying to get away. You're afraid of the feelings that you're actually having, which
Mhm.
means you're actually afraid of the exile. The exile is holding so much wounding, and
Right,
you're like, hell no, I'm
right,
out of here, right?
right. And sometimes that's what you need.
And sometimes, and sometimes you need a good stiff drink.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Anyway, I really love this theory, and I feel like it's very uh I just think it's happening now. So anybody that's really interested in it, there's so much reading. His books, I think the newest one is No Bad Parts, by Richard Schwartz. It's it's really good, and it actually has a lot of exercises in it, so you can kind of try a little bit of it on yourself, right?
Yeah, I think if I could just make one last point, I think the biggest thing I take away from IFS work in my own personal work and my work with clients is you want to keep these parts that are trying to keep you away from the exile in mind, and you have to work with them because I think we go to therapy and we think, oh, I'm just going to heal my trauma, like I'm just going to go to the thing. You really have to work with the parts that have been protecting you from that for so long and acknowledge them and like invite them into the room and like find out about how hard they've been working and appreciate them, and then negotiate with like, okay, but is there a possibility that we could get down there? And if they say yes, then go there, but like if you just go there, then they punish. They actually punish because they're like, no, we've been doing this for so long. You can't just go there. So it's just for me, that was the most important thing to take home.
Yeah. The question of, when the therapist asks you, can you see the part? And you say yes. So you say yes, Nick. And then I say to you, how do you feel towards the part? That's
Mhm.
like the main thing. Because if you say to me, I'm so angry, like I'm so irritated, that's not your higher self. That's actually another part,
Mhm. Mhm.
right?
Mhm. Mhm.
So what the healing looks like in this theory is that you can access your higher self and you start to have a compassionate feeling for
Mhm.
all of your parts. So the point is not to get rid of the parts. The point is just to be able to see them and validate them. It's really not unlike children that need to be seen and validated and heard, but they also are not allowed to drive the car. They have to stay in the back seat, in the car seat.
Exactly. Yeah. Thanks.